I'm finally free of that baggage. Starting today, I'm living with my parents at my place. Those were the words my husband hurled at me, standing dazed in front of the demolished family home, right after my parents passed away. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind too? Hurry up and bring the inheritance to our house. I burst out laughing at his words. So, that's what this was about. What's so funny? Don't you guys know? Know what? James and my in-laws looked at me perplexedly as I laughed. I then told them the truth. My name is Emma. I was born as the eldest daughter into a perfectly ordinary family. I had one brother and my parents are company employees. At 29, I married James and had 2 children. Juggling work and parenting, I suddenly found myself at 55. My son, Lucas, and daughter, Sophia, had grown up and become respectable members of society. Now, they were living on their own, struggling with their new jobs. I thought I could finally relax with my husband. It was an ordinary life, but it was happy. I assumed we'd just keep growing older like this. My ordinary life changed on a winter day. My father was in a traffic accident and passed away suddenly. He was only 72. His sudden absence plunged our family into deep grief. Especially my mother, who was so depressed she couldn't even eat. Mom, I know you're sad, but you have to eat. I repeatedly told her this. I know, but I just don't feel like eating. I feel like there's something stuck in my chest. My brother and I thought she was just grieving and watched over her for a while. But she lost weight rapidly within just half a month. Worried, I took her to the hospital. What? Cancer? I was shocked when the doctor announced her diagnosis. It was advanced, inoperable, with about a year left. I hadn't even been able to repay my parents yet. No sooner had I lost my father than my mother was struck by this. I was more devastated than when my father died. But there was no time to grieve. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied on. So, it was up to me to help my mother. I immediately told James the first wanted to live with her. I couldn't leave my sick mother alone, both emotionally and physically. But James's response was unexpected. What? We just finished the funeral, and I still have to put up with your parents? James said this with a sigh, clearly annoyed. Don't talk like that. Can't you just take her to the hospital? Why do we have to live together? I think she must be feeling lonely. If it's not okay, maybe I should just live at my parents' house for a while. To that, James responded indignantly. What? What about my meals during that time? Of course, I'll come to make them. And what about tidying up? Who's going to do the cleaning? The laundry? I was momentarily at a loss for words. I intended to do what I could, but I couldn't do everything as before. It hurt to be challenged on that. Wanting to care for and nurse my mother was my selfishness, and if called out on it, I wouldn't have anything to say in return. Surely, my mother would politely decline, insisting everything should stay as it was. But I desperately wanted to show filial piety. Fine, but I won't help with anything, understand? James grudgingly agreed as I fell silent. His attitude might have been arrogant, but he did concede in the end. I'm sorry. Thank you. Though I thought he was terrible, he had agreed to my request. I suppressed the urge to retort and thanked him instead. Despite the argument, James and I started living with my mother at my family home. We originally lived in a company house provided by James's employer. James was an only child. Since his father had expressed a desire to live with us, we didn't plan to buy a house, expecting to eventually live with his parents. The company house was more convenient for commuting and only cost about $300 a month, so it wasn't a big burden. But now that we moved to my family home, that expense was gone, and we had a larger house. I think cohabitation wasn't all disadvantages for James. Though he stayed true to his word and didn't help with anything, I was glad to be able to live with my mother. She seemed energetic but often lay down during the day, looking weary. Preparing meals for her, feeding her, and managing her medication was something she couldn't have done alone. Sorry, Emma. Thank you. It's a big help having you here. I should thank James too. My mother repeatedly expressed her gratitude to us. I had kept quiet about James's harsh words when we first talked about living together, so she was thankful to him too. One day, after my mother had gone to bed, James returned home. While serving dinner, I began about Mom's treatment. James glared at me. I don't know anything about that. I said I wouldn't help, remember? He refused even to listen. I wanted someone to confide in, to share my worries. I just wanted James to listen. Even after a month, then too, James's attitude didn't change. He grumbled about the cohabitation, acting as if he had done something noble, and his behavior only worsened over time. But I couldn't say anything against him. Between worrying about my mother and being considerate of James, my stress built up. As the 1-year mark of her prognosis approached, my mother's condition rapidly worsened, leading to hospitalization. 3 days later, she passed away. Even though I was mentally prepared, I was deeply saddened. My brother's family and children rushed over to help, but in times like these, I want my spouse to be by my side. Yet, James was off laughing with his parents, not helping with the funeral arrangements. My brother took on the role of chief mourner, and somehow, we managed the funeral preparations. But James sat at the very back of the relatives section, not in the family section where he was supposed to be. I want James to sit in the family section. When I said that, James replied, No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative, after all. But you are my husband. Hearing this, my mother-in-law joined the conversation. He may be your husband, but he's not your mother's son. James is my son, an outsider, a stranger. That's right. James's parents are just us. Emma can sit in the family section, my in-laws added, and I fell silent. While customs may vary by region in our area, it's common for sons-in-law to sit in the family section at funerals. Sure enough, with James nowhere to be seen in the family section, distant relatives began whispering, did they get divorced? While I found it wrong to gossip, this could have been avoided if James had simply sat there. I felt a slight resentment towards James, who wasn't by my side, but we managed to send my mother off peacefully. After the funeral, we returned home with my brother's family, the children, James, and my in-laws. Thank you for coming during this busy time, I said to my in-laws, offering them tea. Laughing, they replied, really, it's been one thing after another. First, your father, and now your mother. We've had our fair share of hardship with the condolence money. But now, it's finally over, they added. I was frozen by their words. I couldn't believe they would say such a thing. I forced a smile and excused myself. Then I overheard my in-laws and James talking. It must have been tough for James, living with a stranger. Yes. I was really put out by Emma's selfishness. A husband doesn't always have to go along with his wife's demands. It's okay to say no in a marriage. I clenched my fists. Their conversation was unbearable, frustrating, but this wasn't new. My in-laws had always been insensitive and rude. When I married James, my mother-in-law had said, couldn't you find someone better? I can't expect much from the grandchildren. And my father-in-law added, they say beauty bores after 3 days. With Emma, that'll never happen, while James laughed. They were that kind of disrespectful family. Something inside me snapped. Looking back, neither my in-laws nor James had ever shown concern for me, not during my father's funeral or after my mother's death. Instead, they ridiculed me. I had felt guilty for imposing the cohabitation on James, but now I questioned his behavior as a person. I had wanted to care only for my mother, but I realized I had been too accommodating towards James. He never stood by me. There was no reason for me to feel so guilty towards him. Behind my rising anger, my in-laws and James continued to laugh and chat. If my brother's family or children had heard them, they would have been upset, but luckily they were in the kitchen. Relieved that I was the only one who overheard, I was jolted back to reality by my mother-in-law's voice. Emma? Yes. I responded, startled. Can I get this? She approached, holding my mother's bag. Confused, I stammered, Your mother won't be using this bag anymore, right? James said I could take it. I think I'll have it, she said, examining the bag as if appraising it. To be so disrespectful right after the funeral was beyond rude. I snatched the bag away from her. No, you cannot. Excuse me? My mother-in-law's eyes flashed with anger, not so much at being denied the bag, but at my defiance as her daughter-in-law. Yet, I stood my ground. I'm not ready to sort through my mother's belongings just yet. We'll distribute them among the family later. She turned red with fury. What did you say? Are you calling me an outsider? You said earlier, even James was an outsider to my mother at the funeral. How can you claim to be family when James is an outsider? I found myself retorting. Hearing this, both James and my father-in-law turned red. What are you saying? Apologize to my mother. How disrespectful for a daughter-in-law to speak like that. Their commotion drew everyone from the other room. After all the trouble we went through, attending the funeral and cremation, I didn't expect to be treated as a stranger. Let's go home, dear, my mother-in-law shouted at me and left our house. For some reason, James, too, angrily went home with his parents. What happened? Did you really call your mother-in-law a stranger? Hearing only her side, everyone questioned me. Taken out of context, it did sound terrible. But I explained everything to them. No one blamed me. The grandparents should be more considerate of others' feelings. Dad's the same. That family has always been like that. My children stood by me, but I couldn't forgive those three. James didn't return for a while, and I didn't contact him. I felt it wasn't right for me to apologize, nor could I forgive him if he did. But I knew things couldn't stay this way. One day, James returned home. Welcome back. Seeing his face reignited my anger, but I suppressed it and greeted him. Then, he said, It's been tough, huh? Though gruff, his words of concern took me by surprise. Take the kids and go on a trip. It'll be a good change of scenery. He handed me travel vouchers. I was speechless. Tears started to flow. Maybe the kids had put him up to it. Even so, I was happy that James went along with it. I immediately contacted the children to plan the trip. Really? Dad did that? That's unexpected. They seemed surprised by my suggestion. It appeared to truly be a gift from James. Maybe Dad felt bad about everything. I said, laughing. Gratefully, I accepted the travel vouchers from James. I'll be going then. All right, take it easy. Why don't you stay at the kids' places too? Really? I can't be away for that long. Just go. I'll be relaxing at my parents' house, so don't worry about me. With that, James sent me off. Sophia was happy to have me over, so before the trip, I visited both Sophia's and Lucas's homes. Since I hadn't been able to visit them while caring for my mother, I helped out by cooking some meals and stocking their freezers. Mom, you're not resting at all. But thank you, this is really helpful. They were both delighted to have my home-cooked meals. It was all thanks to James's suggestion. Then came the much-awaited hot spring trip. I relaxed at the spa with my children, feeling the weariness of caregiving and the sadness of losing my parents melt away. After being away for nearly a week, the children returned to their homes with bright smiles. We had a good time. We should thank Dad once in a while. Yeah, once in a while. But I wonder if he's up to something? Sophia joked with a laugh. Don't say that. Dad thought this through in his own way. I laughed along. Returning home, I planned to share my memories with James and look forward to a happy life together as a couple. But upon arriving home, I was speechless. What's going on? Where's the house? I looked around in confusion, recognizing the place but not finding my home. Then, out of nowhere, James appeared, followed by my in-laws, all wearing smug smiles. James! What's the meaning of this? I demanded. James, with a sickening smile like his parents, said, I've finally got rid of the baggage. From today, we're living with my parents at our place. What are you talking about? I retorted, trying to remain calm. James spoke again. Have you lost your mind? Your family home is demolished. Bring the inheritance to our house. Your inherited assets are James's now, his mother chimed in. That's when I realized. The disappearance of the house was James's doing, and it was all for the inheritance. What a betrayal after I had been looking forward to our future. I was overwhelmed with sadness and anger. But even if they demolished the house, I wouldn't let them have their way. I burst out laughing at the three grinning faces. As I laughed uncontrollably, my mother-in-law and James looked puzzled. What's so funny? What a weird woman. Has she gone mad? My mother-in-law looked at me as if I were something eerie. Facing them, I opened my mouth. Don't you guys know? Know what? I responded to James. I didn't inherit a single dollar. So, there's no inheritance. After saying this, I started laughing again. They must have misunderstood that I had become wealthy through inheritance. I couldn't stop laughing at the three of them for their baseless assumptions and actions. What do you mean? Explain yourself, demanded James. But I chose to remain silent. There was no need to explain anything to them. Firstly, I won't live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it alone. Ignoring James's questions and rejecting his initial proposal, my mother-in-law burst into anger. You helped with your parents' housework but won't help us? You know there were reasons for that, I retorted. I agreed to live together, didn't I? I never wanted to live together. Don't you remember choosing to live with me just to avoid housework? James and my mother-in-law were left biting their lips as I countered each of their arguments. Moreover, demolishing a house without permission is crossing a line. I yelled at them and then left the scene. Where do you think you're going? They called after me, but I didn't turn back. I needed to find a place to sleep for the night and couldn't bear to see James's face anymore. I immediately consulted a lawyer. Demolishing a house can't be done so easily. The property was still in my mother's name. As I wondered who could have done it, an unbelievable truth came to light. James and my father-in-law had demolished it themselves. They had prepared thoroughly, getting help from my father-in-law's contacts in the demolition business and renting heavy machinery. Moreover, they gave me the travel vouchers to get me out of the house. I felt pathetic for being deceived and was incredibly angry. Is there any way to punish the three of them? I asked my lawyer in tears. He smiled kindly and said, since James demolished a house in your mother's name without permission, he can be charged with property destruction and held liable for damages. Let's start by demanding a formal apology from James and his parents. I nodded in agreement. The lawyer promptly began the process. A few days later, James called furiously after receiving the legal notice. What's this content certification? Oh, you received it? You destroyed my precious house, so of course, you have to compensate. Compensate? We were going to move into our family home. We demolished an empty house for you. You should be thanking us, not demanding compensation. Now bring the inheritance and come back home. James arrogantly insisted. Demolished it without permission and expect thanks? Don't make me laugh. And what inheritance? There isn't any. I yelled back at him over the phone. James fell silent, apparently stunned by my outburst. That was why I laughed when the house was demolished. I had a year to discuss everything with my mother. Of course, we talked about the inheritance. I don't want anything. Give it all to my brother. That's what I had said. My brother inherited all the cash and securities. He then offered me the house. My brother lives far away and can't manage the house. He said if I'm not living there, I could rent it out to someone else. That's why I was supposed to inherit the house. Anyway, you and your father have to either restore the house to its original state or pay the amount written in the notice. That amount, I was considering a settlement out of goodwill. Fine, if you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue. I spoke firmly. I'm sorry, I didn't think you'd be so angry. I have every right to be angry. James began to make excuses. He thought that as long as my family home existed, we couldn't live with his parents. Especially his father, who had always wanted to live with us. He liked Lucas and wanted to live with him, and it seemed my in-laws thought I was the one against it. They apparently demolished my family home and convinced themselves that I would move in with them with the inheritance. But such an explanation was unforgivable now. Just forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. My dad's regretting it too. If he's truly remorseful, then accept the settlement. I said and hung up the phone. James kept calling and messaging me to apologize. If you feel sorry, then transfer the money right away. I pushed him away. I knew the house couldn't be restored, but it was the only way I could process my feelings. Afterward, I stayed at Sophia's place. My brother's family and my children knew about this. My brother was angry about the house being demolished without permission, but he said, I won't interfere, but I'm here to help. Do what you think is best, Emma. Everyone condemned James's actions and supported me. A month passed without any payment for the damages. There was no contact from James during this time. I couldn't rely on Sophia forever. I needed the money to rebuild my life. But contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was Sophia who brought it to my attention. This apron looks like Grandma's. She showed me her phone screen. It was a listing on a flea market app. The apron she pointed out was one I had made for my mother, a one-of-a-kind item. What's this? That's Grandma's apron. I made it, so that's for sure. Really? Sophia checked other listings in shock. The seller was new with no transactions or ratings. There were nearly 30 items listed, and to my horror, they were all my mother's belongings. I immediately realized it was James's doing. No one else but James, who demolished the house, could have taken my mother's possessions. I called him right away. What's this about the app? App? James sounded annoyed. Furious, I thought he was pretending not to know. Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's mementos without permission, aren't you? Cancel the listings right now. James responded in a fluster. What? No, it wasn't me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back. I hung up and immediately headed to my in-laws' house with Sophia. Where are Mom's mementos? As soon as we arrived, I confronted James. I don't know anything about it, he stammered. Dad, tell the truth. Sophia demanded, supporting me. James was clearly flustered. When my in-laws realized we were there, they too came out. Oh, Sophia, you're here, my mother-in-law said cheerfully. Sophia, visibly angry, said to her, Grandma, tell Dad to tell the truth. The truth? Apparently, Dad's been selling Grandma's mementos. To our shock, my mother-in-law burst into laughter. James, looking troubled, kept repeating, it really wasn't me. Then my mother-in-law declared loudly. James selling them? That's impossible. Because I'm the one selling them. I felt my blood run cold. James must have known. He looked guilty as he glanced at his mother. Despite Sophia's stunned reaction, my mother-in-law seemed cheerful. What? It's quite a hassle, you know. I have to pack everything carefully, take good photos. She seemed oblivious to the fact that she was selling stolen items, cheerfully discussing the app. I struggled to contain my anger. Cancel the listings. Those aren't yours to sell. Sophia, red-faced and teary, pleaded with her. But my mother-in-law appeared annoyed. What's the big deal? I found a fun hobby. I use what I can, sell what I can't, and it's good for preventing dementia. I'm the only grandma left, after all. Sophia, you want me to stay healthy and live long, right? She said this nonchalantly, showing no remorse. Knowing that talking to her was futile, I decided to take action. Sophia, let's go. But. Come on. I practically dragged Sophia out of the house and headed straight to the police station. I hadn't planned to file a report for the house demolition, but theft was a different matter. After explaining that my mother's belongings were stolen and sold, the police acted swiftly, and the app suspended my mother-in-law's account. This at least stopped the sale of the items. On the way back from the police station, I called James. I've had your mother's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you? That makes you complicit. No, And I've filed a police report about this matter. Please cooperate with the investigation. James panicked at my words. What? But we're family, take it back, please. Family? You still haven't transferred the compensation for demolishing the house, and I see no remorse. I rebuked him fiercely. But I'm not heartless. Despite everything, I had lived with James for a long time and had feelings for him. Sighing, I said, I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Return everything. And by the way, your father looked quite unwell. Has he been to the doctor? Huh? I'm not heartless. Just pass on the message. I ended the call. When I saw my father-in-law in a while, he was unusually quiet and had lost a lot of weight. His complexion was worse than pale, clearly unwell. But his family didn't seem to notice. They are so inconsiderate. The next day, my father-in-law called me. Instead of thanks, he scolded me. What do you mean treating me like a sick person? Planning to get rid of me by sending me to a hospital? I have to protect James and my wife from you. I won't go to a hospital. I was just concerned, but his response was harsh. Sorry for overstepping. I was just worried. Humph. I'm not frail and short-lived like your parents. Don't insult me. His words angered me, but days later, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. James called me in a panic. My dad has terminal cancer. What should we do? I don't know. Do you know what he said when I suggested going to the hospital? I'm not frail and short-lived like your parents. Just handle it yourself. Such heartlessness. I didn't expect this from Emma. Who's heartless? Did you ever say a kind word when my mother was ill? Reflect on your own actions. I hung up, feeling no sympathy. Soon after, my father-in-law passed away. I felt no tears for a man who had caused so much pain. At his funeral, a will was found. Despite my father-in-law's insistence that he wasn't short-lived, I was dismayed by his well-preparedness. The house is to be left to my grandson Lucas. The rest of the property is to be split between my wife and eldest son. I was surprised to see Lucas's name mentioned. My father-in-law had always favored Lucas and wanted to live with him. After his passing, he probably wanted Lucas to live in the house, but it seemed more like a nuisance to Lucas. Renounce the inheritance. You don't need that house, do you? I told Lucas, but he was actually happy to receive it. I thought it was a burden, but if Lucas was happy, I had nothing more to say. Lucas inherited the house as per the will, and my mother-in-law happily paid the inheritance tax. Our heir, of course, she said. While I felt a bit down for losing Lucas, something unimaginable happened next. Come to our house. James contacted me, and I immediately went to my in-laws' house. There, like me once, stood my mother-in-law and James, stunned in front of their house. The house was being demolished, with heavy machinery and demolition workers on site. What's going on? It's my house, I can do what I want with it, James retorted. Lucas, appearing from nowhere, looked satisfied watching the demolition of his grandparents' house. Lucas, what are you doing? Stop this immediately. Stopping it now won't change the fact that we can't live here anymore. Lucas, what have you done? My mother-in-law and James pleaded with Lucas, but he just smiled. Did you forget? Grandpa and Dad did the same thing to Mom. Lucas! Grandma, didn't you also do terrible things to Mom? Did you ever apologize? Lucas's smile turned into a sharp glare, directing it at my mother-in-law and James. They fell to their knees. The machinery continued to noisily dismantle the house. Finally, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Later, James, using the inherited assets, paid the compensation and damages. Lucas had retrieved the items my mother-in-law had taken from my mother, safely returning them to me. You have us, Mom. Me and Sophia, Lucas reassured me, and I finally allowed myself to cry tears of relief. My mother-in-law and James lost their house and money, now living again in a company house. Their return to the company house as mother and son was a source of gossip. I shared the truth with a wife of James's colleague who contacted me. They deserved their fate. They'll now have to save for a new home after James's retirement. I'll occasionally share their story as a topic of conversation with friends. I continued to stay with Sophia, but Lucas was getting married and planning to build a house. The sale of the demolished in-laws' house's land brought in a decent sum, proving useful in the end. Let's live together, Mom, Lucas suggested. His fiancée was also welcoming. Not wanting to impose on Sophia forever, I accepted Lucas's offer. I resolved to not become a mother-in-law like mine and to live happily with my new family.